Yes, it's okay with the camera.
Again, Chag Sameach to everybody, and continuing on, since we're in showtime, continuing on with the second half of this program, which is related and, of course, connected with the reason why we're here this evening. One of the very first lessons that I had learned from my teacher, and which I have to admit that I did not understand at that time, in which he said, observe that which is around you. When you see your people displaying I'm looking for the right word because I'm afraid if I don't use the right word, what might appear in the newspapers tomorrow. But if you look around and you notice that certain events that have been already stated, whether it be in the Talmud, whether it be in Zohar, that the Jewish people pay no heed any longer or pay no attention, that should be your clue that must be a very significant event. And of course, I couldn't understand that because, after all, that which is important, everyone pays homage and everyone acknowledges that, like Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, while there is a larger segment of Jews today that do not adhere anymore to the rituals of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, unfortunately, a larger percentage do not. And of course, I think the time has come where our non-Jewish friends are going to be shocked into realizing they've missed a great opportunity on Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is not only for the Jew, it is for all of mankind. But that was one of the things that has been lost, and I don't want to dwell on the reasons why it was lost, but it has something to do with the establishment. Some of the ignorance that has crept in and some of the misinformation, some misconceptions that go around. But I'm going to try to just lead up to this evening's event. This evening's event of Tu B'Shvat is unheard of anywhere other than in the centers around the world. It is a tradition, and I'm going to use that word very pointedly now. It is a tradition that has long outlived its usefulness. And then, several years ago, I again recalled what my teacher had taught me. And when I came across the Ari HaKadosh in his Pri Eitz Chaim, in the fruits of the tree of life, in which he stresses and places so much emphasis on Tu B'Shvat, that I became curious. I said, why would the Ari place so much stress on Tu B'Av on a day that no one pays any attention to it? And when I say no one pays any attention to it, I'm not referring to the Reform, the conservative that probably have never heard of this day, but even in some Orthodox circles, the name might ring a bell, but that's the extent. of where this thing goes. And yet, all around the world, on this day, there are thousands of people who have gathered to celebrate this holiday. Holiday? Let alone, what's today? Rosh Hashanah would be the normal comment. Well, what kind of a holiday is it today? And that, as I said, brought me into inquiring just what is so significant. So let me quote you something which is so unreal. It's so unreal, but that is so glaring, to point up to the ignorance, misconceptions of where religion has led not only the Jewish people, but also the non-Jewish people. But it was very gratifying to learn a few nights ago, and I mentioned it here on Shabbat, that the Gentiles, certainly the Southern Baptists and fundamentalists, are all returning to the prayer shawl again. And they say, look, you couldn't be a good Christian if you don't pray with a talit. Well, that thing threw me for a loop. I said, you mean now the Jews are going to stop putting on talits because our Christian neighbors are beginning to put on a talit? And that man spoke for an hour, that reverend, and I'm telling you, I've never heard anything like that in my life. But anyway, I'm here to discuss again this event, which I'm sure if you speak to many of your friends and neighbors, they won't even know what you're talking about. So let us go, as I've always said in Kabbalah, we have to go to the origins. If this is merely a tradition, then let's lay it to rest, as I've tried to lay to rest many traditions, of which there is no, like we say in Hebrew, raglaim, there are no feet to its credence. But I quote from the Talmud, also written some 2,000 years ago, and I quote the following. This is in Tractate of Tanit, one of the 60 tractates of the Talmud, of the Babylonian Talmud. In fact, it's the last page. Amar Rabin Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel stated the following. Lo hayu yamim tovim li Yisrael ke chamisha asar ba'av. There has never been or will ever be holidays, mind you, not just a day, but holidays, because Yom Tov can never be interpreted in any other way but Yom Tov, holiday. But that is not enough to say that there will never be a holiday, Kim Chamisha Asar Ba'av, like the 15th day of Av. Now, where is it? It is more than all of the holidays that most of us are acquainted with. But more so. Ukiyom HaKippurim. That Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel equates this day of the 15th day of Av like Yom Kippur. Now, anybody who still maintains a connection or an allegiance to Judaism knows about Yom Kippur. That is the holiest day of the year. And yet, the Talmud here equates this 15th day of Av as Yom Kippur, such a wonderful, blessed holiday event. What happened? And so then I recall the words of my teacher. Because if it is that important, just like we have stressed in all the centers around the world about the third meal of Shabbat. Third meal of Shabbat? Certainly our friends who have come to study Kabbalah in the center for the first time, you mentioned the word Sudat Shlishit, they think you just flew in from another planet. What's that? Sudat Shlishit? Third meal? Never heard about it. Neither has most of Judaism today. It's been lost. But it's not something that did not exist within the confines of Judaism. And there too I learned. This I learned from my teacher. It is the most singular, powerful tool for strengthening the immune system. What? Well, medicine hasn't found a particular remedy, a particular medication that can strengthen the immune. Yes, we read this can support a little, but to strengthen the immune system. And here, we've had this with us for thousands of years, and it's been lost. No less than the 15th day of Av. And all the commentators asked this very same question. Rashi, commentators known as Tosafot, and I quote the following. They said, Bishloma Yom HaKippurim. We can understand Yom Kippurim, that it is a very significant holiday, because there is Bei Mechila Uslicha V'Kapara. Because on this day, at least, most of the offenses, and if not all of the offenses, most of the violations that we may have committed over the past year can become nullified. Because this is the day of forgiveness. So we understand why Yom Kippur would stand out as the holiday event above and over all of the other holidays. However, Tisha Tedvav Ba'av, Mahi. What is this all about? What happened? And so, they go on to explain why. And they say because on this day, and this their answer appears to be even more confusing and raising more questions than they answer. Because Yom, in this day, Shekalu Bo Meiteh Midbar. Because on this day, the 15th day of Av, when the decree that after the spies had returned with their damaging, very negative report concerning the land of Israel. If someone is taking care of this tape, I don't know who is, but it's just over with. On this day, when the Jews over 20, age 20, were destined to die in the wilderness, they were not and did not earn the merit to enter into the land of Israel because of that incident of the spies. On this day, the 15th day of Av, death came to an end. In other words, all of those Jews that fell under this decree that they would die in the wilderness, death, the final person who died on this day, and therefore there was no further death within the nation of Israel. And that's the answer, one of the answers, as to why this is a significant holiday. Significant holiday? I mean, what's so happy about the event that now these Jews all fell under the spell of death some 40 years before, and now no more death, but what about all the Jews? All those Jews who did die. I mean, why would we want to celebrate such an occasion? And we have come here, obviously, to celebrate a holiday. Yom Tov, a good day. Why would that be considered a good day? Because now they're all dead. Anyone in his right mind would not, of his own volition, consider this day to be a happy day because all the Jews finally died. All those that were destined to die finally died. And that's what makes this holiday a wonderful holiday. And one other aspect. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that on this day, the daughters of Israel would go out dressed in white, shualin, and everyone would not wear their own dress, but everyone would borrow a white dress from somebody else. That nobody, no daughter of Israel, would that day, this day, Tetvav B'Av, say, how do you like my dress? Or I had this tailored by, who are some of the famous, I'm not familiar, although we have the fashion industry is learning Kabbalah today, as you may have read, but that I don't know who the famous ones are. But that each one could not say, how do you like my dress? You know what it cost? You know what some say, some synagogues, unfortunately, have been turned into a fashion show. Not here, thank God. We all come just dressed in a shirt. Although I understand that the design of shirts today as well. But in any event, Shalom Lavayesh et Misha Ein Lo. In order that no one would be embarrassed. No one would be embarrassed. Everyone would be equal. And that's why this day is a wonderful holiday. Again, does it truthfully, or does it logically, or does it please the mind to accept these reasons as to why this day is such a wonderful holiday? But what I've just made an attempt to present to you is the idea that there is a basis, that this is not something that began with the Kabbalah Center. It's been around for a very, very long time. And one other statement mentioned here in the Talmud, that the daughters of Israel would also go seek their soulmate on this day, as if they shouldn't look for a soulmate any other day. Right? Why this day? And they would go out into the wine fields, Kramim. What's the difference where? Why were all the soulmates waiting, I guess to drink l'chaim, or, well, why were they? I mean, I'm just merely stating what the Talmud says. But there lies the secret, and that's the code upon which we, because of the merit of the Ari HaKadosh, do we understand what this is all about, what this day is really all about. Why have we placed so much emphasis on this day, a day of love? Every day should be a day of love. Every day should be a day of tolerance, of sensitivity. Why this day? Says the Yari, Ki Kedem Gematir Yud Havayat. He says it's so simple. In those 3 words. That the code for Kedem, which means a vineyard, a wine field, adds up numerically to 260. That's its numerical value. Kaf is 20, Resh is 200, Mem is 40, and so we have 260. 260 says the Ari Gematria Yud Havayim. It's 10 times the tetragrammaton. It is 10 times, continues the Ari. It is 10 times, which means it has the full dimension. We know there are really only 10 dimensions. Now science has moved out of the 3-dimension area, for those of you not familiar, and they now are beginning to think, not everyone agrees yet, but they'll soon catch up to Kabbalah, take a little while, that there are essentially 10 dimensions. 10 dimensions. 10. The 10 Sefirot. And in as much as we know that the tetragrammaton is that channel of energy, and that God doesn't have different names because he's a member of the mafia, so he uses another alias whenever he travels from one country to another. But that the tetragrammaton is the channel, those 4 letters, channel the highest intensity of the energy of the light force of God. And therein we have the answer. That the reason death came to an end and that it was so joyous was because it was evident that death could not take place on this day. When this day came, and this day was acknowledged for the first time as a day, because without the consciousness of knowing that this day contains the full dimension, and as we have learned, why in Av and not another month? As we learned concerning the celestial influence of Leo, why is Leo? Why is it called the month of Av, the month of Father? And so we have discussed on numerous occasions, because Rabbi Shabtai Danilo asked the question that maybe some of us may have asked when we were little children. How come all the planets revolve around the sun? Of course, once we became adults, we became adulterated, right? So we don't ask any more questions like little children or the little children we once were. We've lost our fantasy because then we're only children. Now we're adults. We understand better. But Rabbi Shabtai Danilo asked, why do all the planets rotate around, including Earth, including the moon, around the sun? Because the sun channels the full sustenance. The full sustenance. And why do we have the contrary of this day, of the 15th day, on the 9th day of Av, the day of literally the greatest degree of destruction? Is because we know the light force in its intensity prevails in this universe like in no other month, And therefore, just as on Tet B'Av, there was full destruction because the Jews were not balanced, as the Talmud says. What? There was no sensitivity. There was no love. There was no regard for one another. And that was the only reason why the temples 1 and 2 were destroyed. It's because this is not a month you play with the light force of God. The intensity is so strong that we must always be aware that in this month, we can either receive the full intensity, the full sustenance, the full measure of healing of the light force, and incidentally, contrary to what science may believe about the sun, Zohar and the Talmud say the sun is our greatest healer. And yet, we're always worried about what? Sun, too much exposure to the sun, this and everything. The sun is a healer. However, done with a balanced measurement, it is our greatest healer. Overdosing or under protection, under insulation, the same things we learn in Kabbalah. Overindulgence, permitting the desire to receive for the self alone to run amok, without balance, without restriction, can be devastating, yes. And just as Tet B'Av, the display and activities of Jews at that time, was one of a nature of imbalance, there was another day this month, the month of Tet B'Av, in which death could not take place. It was not just because all those Jews finally perished, so now it was a day of holiday. No, they could not die on that day. That was what the Talmud was trying to impress us with. That's why this is a special day. No less than on Yom Kippur. When what happens on Yom Kippur? Once we have achieved atonement, then we know we now will live on at least another year. That is the significance of Yom Kippur. So too is Tu B'Av, a day by which we can tap the energy of immortality. Now we're talking of another dimension, because there's only one other day in the year that we can expect, but never guarantee immortality. Because on Yom Kippur, some of us, unfortunately, chas v'shalom, may not succeed in erasing all of the offenses that we may have committed, and maybe for some there will be no atonement. But on Tu B'Av, no prayers, no asking for forgiveness. It is a day. It is a day that provides those who are conscious of the event of that day, who know about this day, and also make every effort. And that's why we have a Sudah. What does a Sudah do? It combines those of us who may feel inadequate in our behavior, or who may have failed in our behavior to balance, to have tolerance, to feel sensitivity. But once we have joined and broken bread together, then what the Zohar says of Su'udah, it's a Sa'ad. We support each other. And certainly that's what everyone is led to believe in the center. That when we get together, we're not just getting together so we can enjoy and have a good time. It is a Su'udah, coming from the word support. We're all here to share with those of us who maybe do not qualify in this month, in this day of Tu B'Av. Maybe we're maybe in our activities, maybe in our actions, we behave like the people of the ninth of Av, with total intolerance. Maybe that's us. But we have an opportunity to come here and tap the full dimension, like the sun encapsulates the full dimension of the light force, and therefore all the planets revolve around the sun because they are tapping their sustenance from the sun, which channels the full sustenance of the light force of God. What an opportunity. Don't have to sit in the synagogue all day and pray. For me, that's personally what a great advantage. Because Yom Kippur, especially if you come to the center, although I guess we don't want it to end, even when it's all over with, nobody wants to go home, but that's beside the point. But here, all we do is come with an idea, and that is the prevailing idea, at least in the center, that one must be sensitive. There can be no arguments in the center. That's one of the laws. The only time that I request a person to leave is when there is an argument. Other than that, I have to even admit that one woman once walked in, semi-nude, and said, "Am I allowed in here?" I said, "As long as you don't disrupt vocally the services. You could do what you wanted, but she immediately left and came back, and But that's the way she wanted to know what this place is about. Now, as long as you don't disrupt, everyone is permitted. Everyone. In fact, in Los Angeles, I must tell you, we are the only synagogue that the doors are opened all the time. I say open, I don't mean not that they're not locked, but they're open. I say, but anybody can walk in. Who knows? You know what's going on around in the world today, what they're throwing at people, what they're doing. I don't have to tell you. And in New York, they're thinking now, because of the recent bombings at synagogues, of placing a patrolman at each synagogue. If you go to Madrid, you go to Italy, you go to France, today you pass a metal detector before you can enter the synagogue. And our synagogue is open. And I asked people, I said, what's the matter? Well, look, if the synagogue can't protect itself, it certainly can't protect me. I accept it. I accept it. But that's what we want with this place, that it should constantly be filled with energy. And certainly this is a day that just by requesting with one condition, that we accept the idea of tolerance. That's our only precondition. Is have a little tolerance. And you can tap this energy without anything else. No prayers, no nothing. Just having knowledge of what you want to do, yes, because knowledge is the connection. And so with that, I think we'd like to have a little meditation. We haven't had one in Toronto for a long time. I'd like you to lead to meditation.
Meditation.
So that we can bring not only more tolerance, a little more sensitivity. We need it here, certainly in the center, but to all of Toronto and to all of the world. Thank you.